President-elect Joe Biden has fielded calls from foreign leaders who are congratulating him on his declared victory. It's an acknowledgement that key U.S. allies are preparing for a new administration despite President Trump's refusal to concede. When asked about his conversations with world leaders, Biden told reporters yesterday, quote, "I'm letting them know that America is back." However, there are still key figures that have not yet acknowledged the U.S. election result, perhaps most notably Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. To discuss this, we're joined by Ian Bremmer. He's the president of the political risk and research consulting firm Eurasia Group and the founder of the digital media firm G0 Media. Ian, it's good to see you.
Good to meet you guys.
Let's talk about this. Can we say that there is any one prevailing reaction from world leaders to President-elect Biden's election? I mean, I spent the weekend sort of retweeting reaction from world leaders. It does seem that it's sort of pretty uniform and across the board.
I think that they're generally relieved. Most U.S. allies, even though they tried to get along with Trump publicly most of the time, were walking on eggshells. There was a lot of volatility. America First clearly was not meant to appeal to foreign leaders as a demographic. So, I mean, Trump's unilateralist, more transactional approach to foreign policy unnerved a lot of allies, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Canadians, the Mexicans, most of the continental Europeans. And the fact that Trump personally was not interested in working in coordination with his administration as a whole on foreign policy, but wanted to frequently just ad lib it himself, also not what they're used to. So generally speaking, they're pretty happy that he's out. But there are significant exceptions. I mean, there are definitely leaders out there that had a really good personal working relationship with Trump. I'm thinking here Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, Narendra Modi in India, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Boris Johnson in the UK, who honestly, if they had had a choice, they probably would have said, you know what, 4 more years of Trump will be just fine for me. You know, then you've got some rogue states like Russia, like North Korea, where, I think that, frankly, Erdogan in Turkey, countries that actually, the fact that Trump didn't care about human rights, like the strongman leader, that was actually useful for them. So there's definitely, I mean, if you wanted to say, are foreign leaders generally happy that Trump is gone? The answer is yes. But the number of exceptions to that is significant. It's not just a few.
So you did an interview with Bloomberg, this is before the election, and you said that, chances are the relationship between the U.S. and China is probably going to deteriorate no matter who wins the election. Can you explain why you said that?
Well, sure, because I think that the actual policies between the United States and China that define our broader relationship are heading towards greater confrontation. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, you saw all of the remaining Democratic opposition in Hong Kong resign en masse because the Chinese government said, if you're anti-patriotic, it's no longer legal for you to have a position there. I think that's a problem for Trump. That's a problem for Biden. That's a relationship that's going to get worse no matter what. I mean, the surveillance and the concentration camps that millions of Uyghurs have been forced into inside China in the Northwest in Xinjiang. It's a problem for Trump. We put sanctions on the Chinese. It's a problem for Biden. I think issues of technology, a coming Cold War between our tech firms and their tech firms, the Chinese driving that with their state government, and the United States basically saying that Huawei is an existential threat to the United States, and we're going to punish allies that try to work with them. This is a fundamental national security issue for the Chinese, too. And look, I've spoken with Biden's entire national security team on these issues. They have a different perspective on how one goes about making policy. They clearly want to coordinate more with American allies on China. But their actual policy orientation towards China is every bit as hawkish as Trump's. And I just remind you that only 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden referred to President Xi Jinping as a thug. And that wasn't just off the cuff. That was prepared by the campaign. He didn't need to do that. Trump's never said that directly about Xi Jinping. He's actually pretty careful saying, I like Xi Jinping. He's a strong man, but he's a good leader. He has problems with China. He refers to coronavirus as the China flu. Biden wouldn't do that. But we should not pretend that Biden is going to be soft on Trump. I know that was a speaking point for the Trump campaign. But the reality is these two countries really don't trust each other at all. And they're increasingly up in each other's grills. And I think that's going to be a growing challenge.
It's an excellent point that you make, and one that was sort of, as you say, Ian, repeated by the Trump campaign, that, as you say, bears very little, there's not a lot there as far as the facts are concerned. I have a question, Ian, about we were talking about the United States and how world leaders are perceiving what's going on here in this country. There has been an election, as you know, in Myanmar. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has says that he wants, the United States is calling on Myanmar to ensure that the electoral process there is sound. He calls for the fair and accurate tabulation of votes. But I'm wondering, if you are Myanmar, if you're any country in the around the world, are you going to take your cues from the United States going forward, given what we've seen? And it's not the electoral process. We should distinguish the fact that we held an election and every single state election board is saying that they haven't seen any widespread fraud. The process is working the way it's supposed to work. The question, of course, is the President of the United States and his allies in Congress and surrogates that are seeking to undermine the process, the democratic process. If you're a world leader outside of the United States who may have less than honorable intentions when it comes to your election, are you going to follow the advice from the Secretary of State?
I mean, even if you have honorable intentions, you're not going to follow the Secretary of State. Look, I mean, I'm glad that you raised both of these points, Vladimir, because on the one hand, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We just pulled off an election with 67% of the American electorate turning out to vote. That's the highest turnout since 1900, with no cases of credible voter fraud. And the actual administration of the election went off well. And I'm quite proud of that. I think that's something that Americans should be proud of, that the institutions actually function. And by the way, there are a number of Republican senators that have already called Joe Biden and congratulated him on having won. And of course, the media organizations, your own, AP, Fox News, they've all called the election for Biden. But Trump, of course, refuses to concede and may continue to refuse to concede. And he is questioning the legitimacy of the election. In fact, he's even said that he's won. And people like Mike Pompeo have facilitated that. And I think with that going on, the idea that our Secretary of State has, in the last couple of weeks, raised the red flag about electoral illegitimacy in countries like Tanzania and the Cote d'Ivoire and now Myanmar, we're not credible. We should stop doing that, right? I mean, I think we need to take a break from trying to be the indispensable, exceptional Western power that tells other countries how to run themselves. We should maybe let Canada do it for a year or two. They're a little bit more credible. I mean, the fact is that if you're in another country around the world, you still want to send your kids to American universities. You still want to invest in the U.S. market. You'd love to buy real estate here. But I swear to God, you do not want your political system to emulate that of the United States. That would be insane. Our political system has been delegitimized. Our institutions have eroded over the last decades. And it's going to take a long time to rebuild that. And I think as long as that's the case, the United States is not leading by example on these issues. We need to have a little bit of humility. It's not a strong suit for Americans, but it would help.
The president, one of the things that he sort of bragged about is the personal relationships that he has with world leaders, particularly world leaders that are distasteful to a lot of the world. And, when talking about Russia, I'm wondering if Russia is at all concerned about the relationship that the U.S. will have under a President Biden, whether or not Biden will be harder on Russia, or, maybe for Vladimir Putin, he's seen presidents come and go and he's still standing, so perhaps for him it's not that big of a concern.
Yeah, I mean, he really didn't like Hillary Clinton. But I mean, if you think about the Obama administration, I mean, the Russians were all over supporting Assad. Obama said that Assad has to go. Assad didn't go anywhere. The Russians intervened. They annexed Crimea illegally. They illegally sent these little green men into southeast Ukraine. They're still there. They intervened in the U.S. election, and Obama did very little about it as commander-in-chief. And so, you know, I have to say that even though Putin clearly prefers Trump to Biden, it's not like the constraints on his activities have been so great by the Americans. I mean, there's not as much willingness of the Americans to project power in Russia's backyard, and there's not as much coordination with the Europeans on these issues. The other thing I would mention is that even though Trump himself, and you remember, of course, this summit in Helsinki. You remember even the 1-hour conversation, illicit conversation that Trump had at the G20 dinner that I broke the news of, and that the Trump didn't want to admit to, called me fake news until the press secretary had to say it happened. I mean, all of that was happening, but it didn't lead to any policy because Trump's cabinet opposed the idea of the U.S. moving closer to Russia, and the Republicans in Congress opposed it. And there were whistleblowers inside the bureaucracy that opposed it, and there were media that reported on it. And so actual American sanctions on Russia have intensified over the 4 years of the Trump administration. So, I mean, as much as Trump personally has said very nice things about Putin, it's not clear to me that the U.S.-Russia relationship is in a better place today than it was at the end of the Obama administration. And ultimately, I think that matters to Putin. And I think that's going to be pretty consistent with what we see once Biden takes office on January 20th.
Yeah, all really good points, Ian Bremmer. We haven't spoken to you in a while. It's really good seeing you again.
It's great seeing you, Ian.
Yeah, give us a call. We're always happy to do it.
Thank you.
Be good.